So today's topic is how to support all caregivers in a baby's life. Often I think we focus on mums or young mums, first-time mums, but what is the extended family like gran and aunt? What are they experiencing when caring for a child? So we're going to look at how can churches surround families that are blended or have kinship care, as most families do have an additional caregiver of a child. Now, when I say kinship care, I mean it's simply a way of describing families where children are looked after by grandparents, aunts, uncles, or other relatives who are not their parents. We often call it a caregiver. So caregiver is the broader term and includes any person with whom a child lives with, who provides daily care to that child and who acts as a child's parent whenever the biological parents are not present. So a caregiver can be the mother or father, or it can be another family member, as I said, as a grandparent or an older sibling. It also includes some informal arrangements in which caregivers do not have legal responsibility. But as with children, parents and caregivers are really critical in the care system around a child. And so sometimes the word non-parent caregiver is also used. But again, it's these words, caregiver, non-parent caregiver, kinship care, are words that are used to describe an adult who is caring for a child living in their homes without their parents. So in our world, there are many non-traditional parents out there. We also have foster parents. We have adoptive parents. We have step parents. We have aunties and uncles. We have grandparents and others. They're raising kids who are missing a parent's presence for whatever reason. It may not be how we imagine the ideal family, but it's part of life in our fallen world. And in fact, non-biological parents play an important role in redeeming some of the difficult family situations in our world. And some stats is worldwide, 1 in 10 children are living with some form of kinship care, so another adult taking care of them. And in some countries, it's as high as 1 in 3 children. And so it makes it the most common type of care after parental care. So taking on someone else's children and loving them as their own really does demonstrate the human example of Paul discipling Timothy and calling him his son in the faith. And when we think of how God, our Father, has adopted us into his family and called us his child, we can do the same for others. But more importantly, as the local church, we can support those who are doing this and caring for children that are not their own. So stepmothers, foster parents, grandparents, aunties, even child-headed households with children in the first 1,000 days, how are we caring for them? I think some of the movies we see out there where we see, step parents are horrible, and so you get grandparents who can be horrible. They're not. These caregivers really are loving the children that they have been given to take care of, and they also need support. So like every biological parent that we say as Secunia needs support, these non-biological caregivers also need the same kind of love, kindness, compassion, support, and warmth. So there's a saying saying parenting is parenting, whether you gave birth to them or not. And so these caregivers are doing the best that they can in a complex situation. So there are some helpful things and some unhelpful things that we as the local church are doing in supporting caregivers that are caring for a child that's not their own. And so no matter the makeup of the families in a local church, congregations can do certain things to support these families. So whether they're blended families or kinship care families, if there is a will to do so. So firstly, as church leaders, you can talk to the members of your church about foster parents, step parents, and grandparents. We can acknowledge that there are blended families as part of your local congregation and your surrounding community. And we can encourage your congregants to bridge or build a bridge to connect with them. We can also acknowledge these blended families and kinship families in the church, especially on dates like Father's Day, Mother's Day, acknowledging them from the pulpit, but also perhaps giving a chance of someone like, for example, a adopted family couple to share their story, or a caregiver to share their story, but they are also mothers and fathers to be acknowledged on those days. We could also form midweek meetings with families who are in the same stage of life. So families who have children in the first 1,000 days, who have either adopted, fostered, or step parents, grandparents, or with older families that have older children who can mentor these caregivers. And it's also, we can clue ourselves up with the information that's out there around how to foster, how to adopt, so that as a church leader, you can pastorally care for these families or individuals who are thinking of doing this. And so these are just how, as a church leader, we can start creating the warm, welcoming spaces within our church of just being able to acknowledge that these families or these individuals as caregivers, non-parent caregivers, are present within our congregations and our surrounding community, and how do we reach out to support them. But as we continue today, please do put your ideas or even your experiences of how to support, I keep using the word blended family, kinship care, non-biological parents, basically anyone who is not the mom and dad, the biological mom and dad of a child who's raising them. How have you supported a family or individual like this before? Or do you have any ideas of how you as a local church can do that? So please just keep putting them in the chat box, and we're going to be write them later onto a screen, and we can share it and get some ideas. But first, let's hear from Mike. Mike adopted a 5-month-old son with his wife. He now has 1 adopted child, 1 biological child, and is expecting their 3rd biological child. But let's have a listen to Mike's voice notes on adoption. I asked him a few questions around their situation and what, with some helpful things that made them feel supported, what were some of the unhelpful things that people said or did that made them feel not supported, and then how could the local church support them? Thanks, Ruth.
Supported through the journey and felt supported in our church, in our community, by our friends, or at times some strange reactions that you get. You get some more double looks, but I think within a Cape Town scene, it's a far more acceptable, part of culture where it's not unheard of or unseen that you see family with adoptive kids that are obviously adopted. I think what really helped us in the beginning, especially in those early days, was people just treated Jordan as if, and our family as if it was a biological child. So when Jordan came and arrived, we still received meals from our community. They supported us through those first few months, as in if it was a biological child. I think in some ways, Jordan coming at 5.5 months, there's tougher times and no tough times. Obviously, as a female, you're not recovering from birth or whatnot, but it's quite a shock to the system. Even more so at like receiving a baby at like an older age. So there's more responsibilities, and especially with your first kid, it's quite a shock to the system of like what it is to have a kid. So I think just treating it as if it's a biological child's like shock to a family as like the first child. I think what we specifically did was look for a community that has other families with adoptive kids in there. I think within the Cape Town church scenes, if you look around, you'll see that we look for a diverse community that it's not just white people represented, and there's a there's a diverse group. So yeah, it's just also to note that our son is black. Um, so to have a community that represents him in different ways than not just his parents was a very important move for us. So I think if I spoke to other families, I think what is really helpful with adopted families is garnishing a language around what is the right things to say, what are not the right things to say. I must say I'm not very sensitive to what people say because I'm not expecting to know them what to say, but it's really helpful to have some language around it. Um, so especially in supporting a family with adoptive kids, there's some things not to say. Jordan is my real son. People will say, "Oh, don't you want a real son?" It's like, no, he is my real son because Jordan is real. He is my adopted son, and he is adopted. I think the one thing that can definitely like hurt other families, and I've seen it cause hurt in other families, is where um, I don't think there's a stigma around adoption, but I do think it is also helpful to know that most adoptive parents are coached in to speak about it and speak about it a lot. So, an adoptive kid from an early age, you will tell your kid that they're adopted. It's nothing to be ashamed about, it's nothing to be afraid about. It's not a conversation that you have to be afraid of broaching with a child because my son, even though he's 4, he knows he's adopted. We've always told him he's adopted because one day he's going to figure it out. So why not? So there's a lot of research that's coming through of like just support a kid into knowing that he's adopted. This language around tummy mommy. Um, there's language around uh, you're adopted, you're an adoptive child and a biological child. There's no such thing as a real child. A real child is something that lives, breathes, and is alive. That doesn't matter if it's an adoptive child or a biological child. So I think language is a big one, but I think it's very helpful just to say, um, to come up to an adoptive parent and just be like, if you are close with them and you're engaging with them and you want to talk to them about things, is like just be open to saying to an adoptive parent to say, hey, won't you help me to, what is some of the language that you guys use around adoption, or what is some of the language that you're using towards your kid around adoption? I don't think adoptive kids are special in any form, way, or matter. I think my adoptive son and my biological daughter, I look at them in the same way, but I do know that they come with very different backgrounds, and they will have a very different future from each other. So I think, in terms of tips for how church can really support other parents who have adopted, I think it's foster a community around it from the you need a community. You need a community around you to support you, to love you, to pray for you, to assist you, to help you. Same way as if it's a biological child. I think there are lots of ways in which community can come around from a don't shy away from it of like from a they are they are maybe different. It's or they're looking for a type of community or a type of friends or a type of no, it's like we want people from all ages, from all color, from all um, backgrounds, from all nationalities to come and engage with our kids. I think there's nothing better of coming to a church in which kids are loved and supported, not just by the parents and people that are on like Kids Rock or Kids Church kids' church, but by all. So I think engage with it. It's not different, but it is different. I think it's super helpful just to speak to the parents and just ask lots of questions. I don't think most parents invite questions and invite, you know, talk to me about it. And there's no real such thing as wrong questions when it comes to this. So, yeah, I think lastly,
Great. So, as you heard Mike mention, there are words that we can use when talking to caregivers that are important. And I've heard via other people that comments like, those poor kids, they have no real parents. When you're talking to either a foster parent, a step parent, or an adopted parent, or when they ask, where is the child's mother? When a mother's passed away and a stepmother's taken on the child. And it's words like that that can really be not helpful. And they shame the caregiver that has stepped in to raise a child. And we need to recognize that that caregiver is the parent for that child. So the child does have a parent. They do have a mother or a father. And so words that affirm the child's place in that family are important. And so some things that you can help out, like if you have families in your community that have adopted, that are fostering, there's a few things you can do, as Mike mentioned, to do as you would for a family that's just given birth. So provide meals to them. Maybe they need care packs, some nappies or clothing. So to do that for them as well, as they are having a child within the first 1,000 days arrive into their home. Check in with them regularly, see how they're doing. You could also provide some helpful information on the nurturing care framework and how they are, as parents, building the brain of their baby. It still applies to them, even though they may not be a non-biological parent. So encouraging the caregiver to bond with the baby, play with the baby, talk to baby, love the baby, as we would any other parent. And then, as what I liked about Mike saying is that the entire church loves and cares for the child, not just the family and not just some of the key leaders in the church, but the entire church. So it goes back to that, it takes a village to raise a child. So it takes your church village of congregation to raise a child. And so, as we heard, Mike and his wife adopted, but there are also families that foster, as I mentioned. And so one of the key ways you can support is to look at whether that family or that individual can qualify for a SASSA grant. SASSA has introduced a grant to help children without parents to not go through the foster care system. Through that process because of reasons for financial support. So they have created a grant for foster families, and it's an additional amount that's then added onto the child support grant. And this applies if it does usually apply if both parents are deceased, but it's worth looking at all the different grants that SASSA has to see if a family can be financially supported who are caring for a child that's not their own. But then you also get grandparents caring for their children. And I think we're going to hear from our Daisy just now from Sikunye, who is a grandmother caring for her grandchild. And I think no matter how much you love your grandkids, Daisy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, raising them comes with many challenges as well as with rewards. And we wanted to come up with some tips that you can help grandparents that are parenting for actually a second time around. Grandparents usually have the benefit of interacting with their grandchildren on a level that's almost once removed, so they don't have to do all the day-to-day responsibilities that a parent has to do. And so for many grandparents, it's like maybe a weekend, you have your grandchild every now and then, maybe it's a play date, maybe it's babysitting or calling on the phone. But when circumstances in life change, so whether that's through a divorce or a death of a parent or changing in the parent's work schedule, it often falls onto the grandparents to assume full responsibility for their grandchild. And a growing number of grandparents are now taking on the parenting role for their grandchildren. And this often means that they are doing parenting for a second time role and giving up many aspects of independence in their older or years, more senior years. And they're taking on that day-to-day care of the home, but also of what a baby needs in the first 1,000 days, such as feeding, bathing, nurturing, clinic visits, hospital visits. So raising grandchildren, while challenging, can also be incredibly rewarding. And so I asked Daisy a few questions also around her, to give us an introduction of her situation and what made her choose to support her granddaughter. And that what are some of the things that have really helped her? What have people said and done to support her? And then some tips for what her church can do to support her more. Okay, over to you, Daisy.
Thank you, Bryony, and good day to everyone. So my name is Daisy, as you all know, and I am originally from Zimbabwe. We immigrated to South Africa in 2005, and my children were also very young then, but they're all grown up now. So I have 4 kids, 28. My firstborn is 28, and she's the mother of my grandchild. 21, my middle son just turned 21. I have another son who turned 20, and I have another daughter who's 18, and my granddaughter who is just over 3 years old. In fact, she'll be 4 in August. Becoming a grandmother came as a shock to me because I still felt like very young. And for me, I had to process the news. It was just like, I can't believe I'm a grandmother, you know. But what a pleasure and what a joy it is to have a grandchild. So I decided to support my daughter because it's what we do as a family. That's what my mother did for me, my sisters did for me, and I felt so supported. And without that support, it would have been extremely difficult. And I experienced a little bit of that when we immigrated here. I lost that support, the family support that I had. And so it was extremely difficult. So for me, it was just an automatic response that I have to be hands-on and I have to be there for in every aspect. And another critical reason was because she had the child out of wedlock. So she needed that extra support, even though the father is present. She needed me to be close on hand to support her in every way. So what really helped me is the church I was attending when my granddaughter was born. They actually rallied around me because I was the member. My daughter was also a member of the church, but she had been in the youth and she hadn't visited for a while. But they rallied around me. They actually provided the venue for the baby shower. There was no judgment. There was no condemnation. It was just love and excitement. They shared in my excitement. You know, they shared in the welcoming news of the baby. So I felt relaxed. I felt good about it. And it also helped me with processing becoming a grandmother and the expectation and the responsibility, because as a grandmother, you have a huge responsibility, with regards to your grandchild. So that really helped me. The church was one of the pillars and one of the areas where I really felt supported and I felt helped. Another way that the church helped me, I had people that would check in with me regularly on how are you doing, how's it going, how are you doing, checking in with me as an individual, because knowing that my life has also changed and my life has also become busier. So that's where the church actually did step in, and I really felt the support from individuals from the church that I was in relationship with already. I think what the church can do for grandmothers and grandfathers, because it's not only grandmothers that have the responsibility, but grandfathers as well, is rally around them acknowledge them as grandparents, and also that their lives have changed and they also need that extra support, in as much as sometimes we don't live with the children, but we are responsible sometimes for day-to-day care or just helping with various things. So it does become very tasking, and as we are older and not as young as we used to be anymore, it does take a lot out of grandparents. So just to leave a few tips for churches that want to help, something nice that a church could do would be a grandma or grandparents appreciation day, like how we celebrate Mother's Day and we celebrate Father's Day. Just acknowledging the grandparents in the room, doing something special for them, maybe having a little lunch, or maybe just acknowledging them in the service and giving them a chocolate and reaching out to them, just acknowledging them as grandparents, and just, recognizing that they also have extra now duties and extra responsibilities. So that's my experience. That has been my experience as a grandparent.
Thank you, Daisy, for that. And you mentioned the church rallying around you and offering the venue for the baby shower, recognizing that, as you said, your daughter had her baby out of wedlock. And I think that's one thing as a church we can really speak into, some of the stigma around non-parent caregiving and the unhelpful things that people say or assumptions they make. And really replace it with the truth of God's redeeming truth. And as you said, like that maybe grandparents are blamed for their children's bad life choices, but actually, encouraging God's love in those situations. And one way being you can, like that, provide a baby shower. And so just to encourage churches to find a grandmother or a grandfather in your church or in your community and ask them what they need, speak to them about some of the challenges they're having. They may be struggling to raise the baby on a pension. They may have limited support from other family and they don't get much rest. As Daisy mentions, also the energy to manage a very busy child. You grandmothers and grandfathers are older and it's the second time round of parenting. So we really want to empower those grandparents to raise resilient and healthy children. So how do we help them to adjust to the role of being a caregiver? Some of the financial, social, and mental health things that they will face. And most importantly is, regardless of whether it's a grandmother, grandfather, uncle, aunt, we really want that caregiver to create a healthy attachment bond with the child, with the baby. And so to keep giving that information and support around how that caregiver is building the brain of that child, and how can they keep building a strong bond so that child will feel loved and supported and in a family. And so I want to ask Sophie, who's with us today. I want to hear her story. She's got a story to tell us about her daughter. And again, if there's anyone else who has supported a child that's not their own, and would like to give us some tips on what support they needed to do so, or what ideas they can have for their local church to help care for and raise someone else's child, please do put it into the chat box. We're going to come back to that just now. But in the meantime, I want to ask Sophie to tell us a bit about her story and the daughter she took on to raise.
Hi, Bryony. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving the opportunity. So my name is Sophie. I am from Villiersdorp in the Western Cape, and I'm from the Villiersdorp Community Church. I am a mother of 4 children. They're now young adults and teenagers. My eldest son is Noah. He's now 22. Justin is 20, and then Timothy is 17. And my daughter, our daughter is Jasmine, And she came into our life actually when she was 18 months old. I grew up on the farm where her parents, biological parents, also lived. So we used to take her in with us for weekends because her parents drink a lot. And I just wanted her to see that not all families drink and fight. And then tragically, her father murdered her mother in her presence. And she came to live with us just after she was 2 years old. And for me, the best advice that we received at the time was to take her for counseling, which was in the form of play therapy. But the love and support from our church family was really amazing. With clothes, like Bryony, you mentioned earlier, with clothes, milk, that necessities that they gave in, and really just we were just surrounded by so much love. And also I'm talking now about my daughter is now 21, so I'm talking now about 19, 20 years ago, but I still remember the love we experienced, and also they checking in. And when it comes to somebody or what was said that was not so kind, was the children in my daughter's case that go through something similar. They always end up like giving a lot of problems when they are older. And it mostly came from family members, but my maternal family was very, very supportive. And the magistrate, because people say, why does the child just go to her family? But fortunately for us, the magistrate ruled in our favor. And by that time also, I have a 4-year-old. The son was 4. The middle son was 2 years old, and I was expecting our third son. But what I really, really also stood out, the boys really accepted us. He basically grew up with a baby that was born, and they always refer, when they become here 4, 5 years old, they always, when they talk about me or their father, they will tell our girl, our mother call you, our father call you, our mother said. And it was only later that I realized it was their way of saying, you are our sister. And then what I didn't want to live, so I just make I can encourage church congregants or leaders or people in the church to get involved is like really help by the practical day-to-day. Brian, you also mentioned it, but I had first-hand experience how much it helped with a care pack, like nappies, like clothes, formula milk most times, because the mother is not there for breastfeeding, and also making turns to provide a meal. Pop in, offer to babysit, even if it's just an hour or two, so the mom can take a nap. I remember after Cece was about 3.5, and I needed to go on an outreach, and there was a couple in our church that offer that she stay with them for the week. But she had so many grandparents and uncles and aunts, and also soft toys and books that you can also give to a family, and also include the rest of the children. Don't exclude them. And then, what I can just say in closing, I might not have give birth to her, but she was definitely born in my heart since I laid eyes on her. And it was the most rewarding journey, but also it has its challenge, but we never felt alone because we have the blanket of support of our church family, and that made such a huge difference. And I'm just looking at my daughter and I'm just, thank you, Lord, for the amazing work that you did in her life. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Sophie. And I just want to share a photo that you sent us. Ruth, if you're able to screen share. So as we saw, you took on your daughter at, you said 2 years old, and then now she got married just the other day, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Adults with you as she got married. So it's a beautiful story of caring for a child that's not yours when her parents have passed away, and you stepping in with that kind of love. So thank you, Sophie, for sharing that with us. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for the tips that you gave. And I know for many of us that we may be thinking of older children being cared for, but we, as you know, Sukunya, we are thinking about children in the first 1,000 days. But this actually applies to all children that are being cared for by non-parent caregivers. And so what we want as the church and as Sukunya, we'd love that all children belong in thriving families, no matter how that family is formed. And as we heard Sophie and Daisy and Mike saying, is that all families need support to be able to provide nurturing care to their children. And their children is whether they gave birth to them or whether they have adopted them or fostering them or parenting them as a grandparent or taking them on as a child of their own. And so in all these situations that we've heard today, the one thing that stuck out for me was that we really need to see the caregiver. So who the caregiver is, without any judgment, without any shame being put onto them, without any ideas of what's wrong with the child or what's going to happen later or that this child is not theirs, but to see that caregiver for the love and the heart that they have for that child and really listen to them to find out what support would be helpful for them in that situation. As we heard from Sophie, it's providing care packs. So if the baby, as she said, you've taken on a baby that you're not breastfeeding, so formula food and care packs of nappies and clothes, and there's so many things that we can do in a care pack that can really provide support to a family that's got a child that's not biologically theirs. I know a few people have been putting things into the chat box, which we're going to read through. As I mentioned, the SASA grants also. I see Pindila, you're saying participating in pleasant, nurturing activities. So you're right in bathing, feeding, cleaning, all of that for baby. And I think, as you say, that we still need to provide the same information that we would to a parent, a biological parent, around the building blocks that every child needs to thrive and how to provide this as a parent. And I think with that comes along some parenting skills that maybe they've, as this caregiver has taken on a child at a different age. They're all different ages, and throughout the first 1,000 days, we're saying, but regardless, parenting skills are maybe needed for that caregiver at whatever starting point that they're taking on the child. I see there's equipping caregivers with all the needs showing up for them, raising funds for the caregivers from Violet. And I see, Bakiti, you've said that your neighbor has a boy who's just started school and you help with homework and take care of him in the evenings and for prayers. So yes, so we can pray for and with families. Prayer support is hugely valuable, and so encouraged to do that. We can also try and understand the challenges that caregiver is going through and pray into those challenges. Sophie, you mentioned a couple saying that they would take your daughter for a week, that you could take a break. Non-biological caregivers need a break too. And so I love that idea of how the church can be many grandparents or many uncles and aunts to a baby that's been cared for by a non-parent, and can actually also step in with childcare, with helping out when the child grows older, and being able to let that parent take a break. And if there are any more ideas, keep putting them into the chat box. But I also like where you said that the church was having a regular check-in. And so that's really important as a church. That's something you can do. The wonders of WhatsApp and calling is you can check in to see how they're doing, what kind of financial or practical support they're needing. You could also just be someone that they talk to and listen. And yeah, provide any information they may need. But above all, it's showing them love, showing that you love them, and that you see them as the caregiver to this child. Often, as you also mentioned, Sophie, counseling. So if a child has come where there may be loss or grief or trauma or other struggles, that family or that caregiver also needs support. So counseling may be something you can offer as a church. And we also look at, if it's a single grandmother or a single auntie or a single woman who's taken on a child that's not their own to care for and love them, does that child need a social father? So maybe there's an extended, as you mentioned, Sophie, like having extended family in the church, that there's many uncles and aunts and many grandpas. So maybe stepping in as a pastor of a church or as a key leader in the church, stepping in as a social father to help support. I see time and support from Pindile, that we can provide time, just even if it's to talk. And then, as we heard Daisy say, is like even on Father's Days and Mother's Days, how are we including these non-biological parents, and how are we recognizing them, encouraging the church to see them and the role that they're playing. So you can have special Grandparents' Day, you can have Step Parents' Day, you can have Foster Parents' Day, but you could, on Father's Day and Mother's Day, also recognize the different ways in which individuals are mothering children or being a father to a child that is not of their own. There's also to look into who is in your community, what organizations are there. You have the child protection organizations. There's a few that we thought of. There's Arise, there's Wandisa, Nyoma's Joy, Kin Culture. There's different, which we'll send information on, but these are different organizations that are working to help with fostering or caring for a family. They're also adoptive parents, temporary safe houses, and they also look at parents caring for children who aren't born to them but have no legal care over them. They also, there's these organizations help support those, should I say, families or individuals that would not be your ideal nuclear family. And so to really see who you can collaborate with to get more information, and that will help you support those situations of families and caregivers. And I think, as we said, it's all children really need to know that they belong, that they're loved, and that they're valuable. And they need assurance that they still belong to a family. So I want to encourage us that as we leave today, to look for those non-parent caregivers in your community. Look for the grannies and grandpas, look for the aunties and uncles, the step parents, the foster parents, the adoptive parents, even the child-headed households. Look for them and find out how you can support them so that the child they are caring for knows that they are loved, that they are wanted, that they're valuable, and that he or she